so that there's less barriers between the provinces. What makes that hard? Like, what are the things you need to do to make that happen? And how could, you know, because I think both in Europe and in ASEAN, countries need to learn this. But
well, and let's put this in context. The worst case global trade war scenario, many of which various organizations were running earlier this year, the IMF and others, others calculated for us that just reducing domestic barriers in Canada alone would have a bigger economic payback than would be taken away by the worst case scenario. So that's just reduction of barriers. I don't think she'll mind me quoting this, well, I'll do a Chatham House rules. I was a lead of a large international financial institution here in Kuala Lumpur may have said earlier today, and closed our session, that their calculations of removing the barriers within ASEAN, the main barriers, I think even on just goods trade, was about 4.5% of GDP. Of ASEAN GDP. Those are big numbers. So that's more than a percentage point of global GDP if you just do the multiplier on that. So these are large. Now, how do you do it? In Canada, we have done it at the federal level. That's one of the things we did within the first few weeks of getting into office, is we passed a law which removed all the federal barriers. Now we need to do the hard part, which is between the various provinces. And I guess the point is that there are two models to do this. One is the European one, where you move the responsibility up and you have a harmonization across the whole level, the whole grouping. And the other is you have some form of mutual recognition, substituted compliance. I will acknowledge that your rules are roughly comparable to mine, so you don't have to meet both of those standards. It's not really my place, but I would suggest that it's far more likely that it's that type of approach that would work in ASEAN, given there's not the element of there's no element nor prospect of a political union. So it has to be that type of approach.
But in Canada, though, those barriers between provinces that still exist, I mean, I remember you saying a few years ago that a crisis permits government to move fast and in a coordinated way. Is this a crisis in Canada? Is it going to help you reduce the barriers between provinces?
Yes, it's a crisis because it's a fundamental change in many of the operating, I was going to say assumptions, but the operating rules of the system. I mean, the reliance on the open global trading system, a reliance and an expectation of further integration, particularly in North America. I mean, that's not going to happen. It doesn't mean there isn't still going to be a fair bit of free trade in North America and cross-investment, but this sort of relentless process of greater integration has reversed. That's a big change. And when you have a big change like that, and you had your economy oriented towards that, which ours was, some of your strengths become vulnerabilities, and you have to do big things. And so one of the lessons, we've talked about this, many in the room have lived it. I've certainly, by luck, I would like to say, not because of cause. I didn't cause the crises I've been in, but my experience of being in them is, in a crisis, you have to be bold, you have to act big. Uncertainty weighs down activity, and unless you're leading from the center, whether you're a central bank with respect to supporting financial institutions or monetary policy, or you're a government in terms of charting a new course, you need to be bold. And that's why we're looking for scale in terms of diversification of our exports. That's why our budget, which is coming out in 2 weeks' time, is going to have what we call generational investment in Canada on an order of magnitude that really changes the scale of the economy, the ambition of the economy. Of course, it will also, just by its very fact, provide GDP and growth and jobs for Canadians. But as important as that is, more important is going to be a reorientation of the country, and very much an outward-looking orientation that I think is very complementary to ASEAN.
One of the really hard things for the countries in this region is that although in theory they would be able to negotiate, for example, with the United States much more strongly if they held together, the new US approach is very much, we'll only negotiate with countries one by one. How can countries in the rest of the world who want to diversify and sustain cooperation, how can they balance the need to line up and do one-by-one deals with the US administration with the need to actually forge relations in their own region with other regions? I mean, it feels like, you know, you've been a bit of an example for European leaders in how to do that, how to sit calmly and negotiate in the White House, but at the same time, you're here, you're pursuing those other kinds of deals. But I just wondered, what's your observation on this for countries in ASEAN who are being pushed to do the one-to-one deal, but who actually need to think about their other trade partners?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and with respect to the European Union, of course, President Costa is here as well, also participated as a partner of ASEAN in the meetings this morning and through tomorrow. And that'll bring me to a point I'll make in a second. I think a few general points about the situation with respect to the United States. The United States has a new trade policy. It applies to every country, every jurisdiction in the world. We understand that and we respect that. It is a major shift, and the way we're framing it is it's a rupture, not a transition. This is a very big change, almost overnight, and therefore it's difficult to deal with. It can be difficult to deal with, but everybody's dealing with it. That's the first. The second is, if your economy is highly integrated, or certain sectors are highly integrated with the United States, revealed preference, to use a fancy term, is that you will pay a price to keeping access to that market, either in the form of tariffs, changes to some domestic policies, commitments for investment. Different countries have done various versions of that. What you should try to avoid doing, though, is tying your hands about what you can do with other jurisdictions. Because there are a lot more countries by GDP that are willing and keen to continue to have relatively open trade, certainly to have rules-based trade, to respect rules-based trade, to have, that is happening in parallel to these sharper changes. So you get a sharp change in the relationship with the U.S., as the President has said, and I understand this and respect it. He said it, me sitting next to him, we are going to charge countries for access to the U.S. It's like access to a good country club, I think he might have said, or Costco. Put it another way, I think he thinks more on country club than Costco. We understand it. It is the premium market. It's the most dynamic economy. You decide what you're willing to pay, but at the same time, you want to be in other clubs. You want to be at other tables. You want to be building that out. And I said I would make a point about the European Union. I think it's quite relevant for ASEAN, or if I may broaden it a bit more towards cptpp. Some members are part of that. These are two large trading blocs with not identical, but complementary approaches to trade. And there is an opportunity. It's a point I've made. It's a point some others in cptpp have made. There is a possibility of bringing those closer together, having at a minimum a docking between the two blocks or broader arrangements that there. And that's how you start to rebuild a broader global trading system. You're approaching more than a third of global trade there, potentially 40%, depending on how you do it. Provided you have you've retained that flexibility in order to do that. And as things stand right now, most countries have.
So is this a sort of short-term, medium-term, long-term thing? In the short term, are we going to see countries doing a lot of deals with the United States? But in the medium term, needing reliable partners. If you're going to reorganize your whole economy for trade, you need reliable partners. So in the medium term, do you think we're going to see a world which trades a little less with the United States and a little more within regions and between regions?
I think short answer is yes. I think as well, there would be a natural, it's at a minimum, it's an acceleration of a trend that the weight of economic activity and dynamism would drive as well. I mean, this is we're in one of the most, arguably the most dynamic regions in the world, and naturally more trade is going to flow to here. I'll give you another example. Just the very fact that one of the themes of this presidency is sustainability. And there's an understanding that moving towards lower carbon energy, lower carbon manufacturing, lower carbon services, etc., will be a driver of competitiveness. It's good for the planet, but it's a driver of competitiveness. There's an understanding of that. And it's not just a theme, but a lot of the discussions are around how do we build that out. That is not a priority at present in the United States, or at least it's not an administration priority in the United States. So naturally trade is going to shift away by definition. The other reason is from the US for a period of time on that. It's also shifting because it's more expensive to trade with the United States. That's what a tariff does. And that will drive some of that as well. But all of that said, the United States is the world's largest. It is the most dynamic economy. It is a source of constant innovation, and everyone, very much Canada included, is going to want to be active.
And look, you've long championed kind of sustainability in a number of roles, advising the UN, advising prime ministers, etc. Are you optimistic or about the sustainability agenda holding? I mean, the world as I see it, the backtracking of the United States has led a lot of companies to say, actually, let's slow down on the sustainability stuff. Let's slow down on the net zero stuff. Are you seeing that? Is it harder to be an advocate for net zero?
Well, I've got a different job now, which is to advocate for Canada and to manage for Canada. What I think you're seeing is, and this is in terms of our approach, you're seeing a sharp move towards performance over targets, investment and action over sort of prohibition. So in other words, and I'll give an example on that, which is, I referenced earlier, Canadian LNG and the opportunity that's there. If we went back 5 years, there would have been a greater focus on leapfrogging from coal in the region to solar and storage, particularly. There's probably more of that transition is going to be with gas for a period of time. Not all, there will be a number that do leapfrog. So that's an example, but that's a material reduction in emissions. It's a different route to it. Carbon capture. Let me give one other example. Canada has just under 12% of the global capacity in carbon capture. A huge number. One of the I referenced about $500 billion of investments over the course of the next 5 years. Part of that will be in major carbon capture to decarbonize our exports of oil, decarbonizing Scope 1, Scope 2, to be clear. You can't decarbonize Scope 3. Again, that's performance, and that's investment for emission reduction. So that's a shift. If I can make one last point, which is something coming out of the region. Singapore, Malaysia, and others have been amongst the leaders here, which is actually tracking the emissions of goods and soon services, so it's going to be clearer where that performance is.
So you mentioned there that it's one thing to be an advisor on sustainability, it's another thing to become Prime Minister for all Canadians, including those who are in the energy sector. What surprised you about becoming Prime Minister? I mean, there's not that many Prime Ministers in this room. What was the surprise?
What was the surprise? It doesn't end. Well, it does end, actually. I shouldn't say that. When you say it doesn't end, that's just before it ends, actually. But I meant more from a 24/7 perspective. What's the most surprising thing? I think I'll give the most positive surprise, is that you have access to unlimited resources for an issue. So that and it doesn't matter what the issue is, the only thing that's holding you back is lack of imagination and to some degree time, but people will help their government. People will pick up the phone. They will respond to your inquiry. Your officials will be able to get the information, and that is a big advantage. The only caveat to that, you and I know, and many of us in the room have lived through crises. In a crisis, you're never going to have perfect information. You have to know when you've done enough in order to take a decision with imperfect information. But you do have the privilege of, in these roles, of being able to draw on the resources of your country, including the intellectual resources of the country, and it's important to do so.
And look, last question, and it's a big one. But you're an economist. You've been chair of the Financial Stability Board. You've navigated now both financial crises and trade crises. Where do you see the global economy in 5 years' time? Or over the next 5 years, are there big things you think are going to change?
Well, I think it's. I will quote our host, our ultimate host, the Prime Minister this morning, which is, "Where's the effect of the old world or the old system is gone? The new one has not yet formed." And so it's a big question, and it's an important question because in many respects, those of us in this room will help determine where that is. And what we were talking about earlier is Canada free trade with ASEAN, cptpp with EU, that link becoming there, following through on inclusivity and sustainability. The extent to which we actually follow that through, this room, literally and metaphorically, will help determine the direction of the global economy, or a substantial proportion of the global economy. And because it's ASEAN, because it's dynamic, because it's forward-looking, because it's young, that sort of shows where the world is going. And so I think it can be incredibly influential. And we're out of time.
Thank you, Prime Minister Mark Carney. Do join me in a huge round of thanks for Mark Carney.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, some of you are standing. Please stand for the Right Honourable Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada. Thank you also to Professor Larry Woods,